captured. A long campaign is now...
This is the car market in Mogadishu.
NATO's military success against
many Western nations.
This is On Assignment.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to On Assignment, taking you beyond the headlines with our VOA reporters around the world. I'm Alex Villarreal, and look who's back with us, Imran Siddiqui.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be back. First up, she was our eyes and ears in Cairo for 5 years. Elizabeth Ader back in Washington, telling us all about her time in the Middle East.
Then it's on to the U.S., where racial tensions remain high after a controversial shooting in America's heartland.
And later, American citizens are not just targets of the Islamic State, a few are even part of the militant group.
And what's it like to be Christian in China? We ask our religion reporter.
On Assignment is off and running. Let's get to it. It's been over a year since Egypt's military ousted President Mohamed Morsi, and politics still weigh heavily on many Egyptians' minds. VOA correspondent Elizabeth Ader recently returned from a reporting post in Cairo. During that time, she witnessed profound changes in Egypt and the region.
From the Arab Spring to the war in Syria, Elizabeth covered it all. We talked about it. Take a look.
Despite the violence and the killings, people here at the pro-Morsi encampment vow to stay on, pressing home their point they want no military intervention in Egyptian political affairs.
Now, let's talk about your role as a journalist and as a foreign journalist in Egypt. What was that like over the course of the years that you were there?
Prior to the uprisings, people were, fine. It was a little bit repressive and bureaucratic and just getting around and doing things. And when the revolutions and the uprisings took place, people were so keen on telling their story to the world, and there was such pride, and there was such, they thought, here, someone tell our story, and you were very welcomed, and it was terrific, and much easier to work. And then that quite quickly devolved into, there were some areas, in Syria, if you're talking to Syrian refugees in Jordan or something like that, they would be very eager to tell the story, and still be keen on Western journalists. And then as things got worse and worse, I think there were suspicions. They conflate, say, a American journalist with the U.S. government policy or lack of policy.
You talk about the volatility of the situation in Egypt and the continued volatility of the conditions. Do you think we're going to see an end to that anytime soon?
It's hard to say that it could be anytime soon. I think there's so many competing interests, and it's so complex at this point. And there's the other problem too, and we've seen it obviously in recent days, the increasing attraction for people around the world to come, and it's a very, very small minority, but it doesn't take that many people to come and take part in this fight, especially like the Islamic State, for example. And you're seeing people from around the world who think this is cool, that what horrifies us is actually very appealing to a very small minority of people, and they're coming to help fight alongside that, and that's hard to counter.
Did you have any experiences of your own when you were in the region where you felt like, I might be in danger here?
Yes, and various sides, obviously not kidnapping, but, in Libya there was sniper fire, there was bombings. In Egypt, several times been, surrounded, chased, one time tried to be dragged out of a car, another time trapped in a car with a group of sort of 100 people slamming and wanting to kill us. And, and actually it was one time that the secret police of Egypt came to our rescue, and I was actually very happy to see them.
And we're seeing now also a targeting of journalists among some of the violent extremist groups. Tell us what your reaction has been seeing the recent beheadings of the two prominent American journalists.
Well, of course, that was, just a horrible tragedy. And it was done for propaganda purposes, at the expense of these men who were out there just trying to tell a story from all sides and to get a true picture of what was going out, but used for propaganda purposes by a group who just wants to shock and had nothing to do with their reporting per se. It's just purely as a part of their war, and it's a tragedy.
How do you think social media is playing into that? Because now it's not just information coming from sources like us, like VOA or other news organizations. Pretty much anyone around the world can put out their own information that's very public. So how is that sort of affecting the way that you can do your job, and then also the way that people are getting brought into these kinds of extremist
Well, on the positive side, I mean, citizen journalism has been a boon throughout. You know, we're seeing things that we would never ever have seen. We couldn't possibly. The Journalist Corps internationally couldn't cover all the events that have been recorded for us by citizen journalists. And that has been amazing. I mean, that's really helped tell the story of what's going on. The other end of the spectrum is the fact that the other end of this propaganda machines and media campaigns by such groups as Islamic State, and earlier we saw it especially out of Yemen with the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, very, very professional organizations in terms of media, and you know, they've been successful, you know, among a certain group.
And again, that was VOA's Elizabeth Ader. She was our Cairo correspondent from 2009 to 2014, 5 extremely eventful years in Egypt's history.
We're taking a break. On the other side, a teenager's death stirs racial tensions in the United States. You're watching On Assignment. It's a story that made headlines across the U.S. Ferguson, Missouri, August 9. A white police officer shoots and kills an unarmed black teenager. Rioting erupts almost immediately. Even the U.S. Justice Department gets involved, investigating allegations that Ferguson police engaged in a pattern of abuse against the town's black residents. VOA's Chris Simpkins has been covering the Ferguson case, and he joins me right now. Thank you so much for joining me, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about what we know and what we do not know about what happened in Ferguson in August.
Well, as you said, on August 9th, Michael Brown and a friend were walking down the middle of the street in an apartment complex in Ferguson. Brown was going to his grandmother's house when he was confronted in a patrol car by Officer Darren Wilson. Police say Officer Wilson told Michael Brown and his friend to get out of the street and walk on the sidewalk. Police say then a confrontation happened between Brown and Officer Wilson, which led to the shooting. Now, there are conflicting reports about what happened after that confrontation. Police said there was a struggle between Brown and the police officer. Brown punched the police officer, and then the shooting occurred. But witnesses say that Mr. Brown was unarmed and ran away from the police officer, put his hands in the air in a sign of surrender when he was shot by Officer Wilson. So conflicting reports, and investigators are still trying to figure out what happened.
Critics have been comparing these cases like what happened with Trayvon Martin. And they're trying to relate this and trying to bring a connection to this. But is this a countrywide problem that's going on in the U.S.?
A lot of African Americans say it is. They have, and we were told by many people in Ferguson and the St. Louis area, that they had been stopped many times by police officers for doing nothing, and would ask the police officers why they were stopped. Police officers said, well, your tire touched a yellow line, or your license plate looked irregular. But after an investigation, these black motorists committed no crime. Some cases they were let go. Sometimes they may have said something back to the police officer that the police officer didn't like, and they were locked up. So there is a pattern here, and I think a lot of African Americans say that white police officers in this community were targeting blacks and suspecting them of crimes when they absolutely committed no crime at all.
What about the police department? What do they have to say, and what's going to happen to the officer in question?
Well, the police department has said that they are continuing their investigation. The police officer has been put on administrative leave, and a grand jury over the next several weeks will be deciding whether or not to bring criminal charges against Officer Wilson in the case.
And by any comparison, would you classify this as racial profiling?
Some people might say that he was racially profiled, but it's undetermined whether that in fact happened. Mr. Brown was involved in a strong-arm robbery at a convenience store prior to him confronting the police officer. We don't know whether the police officer identified him as the suspect in this robbery, so it remains to be seen. But a lot of African Americans say police, not only in Ferguson, but in that whole metropolitan St. Louis vicinity, often engage in racial profiling.
Okay, we keep a close watch on this. Thank you so much for joining us. Chris Simpkins, VOA's correspondent. Sure. We're taking a break now. When we come back, Americans turn jihadists? You're watching On Assignment.
Many men have died fighting for the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, among them an American citizen named Douglas MacArthur McCain. His involvement with the militants has raised concerns about the radicalization and recruitment of young men from immigrant communities throughout the United States.
The large Somali American community in the state of Minnesota is coming to terms with news that one of its own may be the second American to die with the terrorist group. VOA Midwest correspondent Kane Faribaugh tells the story to On Assignment's Rebecca Ward.
It is difficult for Goth Ali to believe the man in these shaky and grainy social media videos is the same man he met almost a decade ago, Abdirahman Muhammad.
And one of my friends, he told me, hey, Abdirahman is fighting for the Syria, I said, what? I thought he's going to Ethiopia and fighting. I was so shocked, actually.
Ali says the father of 9 left his family behind. And according to posts on his Facebook page that Ali believes are Muhammad's, he resurfaced earlier this year in the Middle East, brandishing weapons and calling for others to join him in jihad.
This is not necessarily a new phenomenon. Since 2007-2008, Somali Americans, perhaps as many as 24, have been leaving that immigrant community in Minnesota and traveling to Somalia to fight with the Al-Shabaab group. The new phenomenon here, or the new development, is that these Somali Americans that are leaving are not leaving to go to Somalia, they're leaving to go to Iraq and Syria. So this person that I talked to, his name is Goth Ali, he thought Abdirahman Muhammad was initially going back to Somalia or perhaps going back to Ethiopia, but when he saw these posts, these videos, these pictures that he was posting, brandishing weapons somewhere in the desert of Iraq and Syria, he became extremely concerned.
And you spoke to others in the community. How did they react to the news that one of their own had gone to Syria and or Iraq to fight?
Well, after, first of all, experiencing the shock of this news, there is, at least some understanding, though no support for this inclination to go back to the home country. But to go to Iraq and Syria is a foreign concept for a lot of these people. There really isn't any family connection there. That's what's shocking and very confusing to a lot of people in that Somali American community.
But he was not the only person to leave the Somali community in Minnesota and go to Syria and Iraq.
Right. Actually, Voice of America, some correspondents in our Somali service were able to talk to a family member whose brother had sent a text message from Turkey saying that he was getting ready to go into Syria to fight in the jihad.
Another Somali American from Minnesota, Abdi Mohammed Noor, is believed to be fighting in Syria. His sister Ifra told VOA earlier this year Nur sent her a text message indicating he planned to join the jihad. The men are believed to be part of a larger investigation by the FBI's field office in Minneapolis. Supervisory Special Agent E.K. Wilson did not talk about specific cases, but addressed the overall problem.
It's a significant concern of ours. It's a very high priority.
Wilson says the internet has become one of the key recruiting tools for terror groups.
It's created the opportunities, or more opportunities, I should say, for self-radicalization.
There are reports in Minneapolis from a local TV station that there's a 19-year-old Somali woman who has gone to fight in Iraq and Syria. So, it isn't just isolated to 1 or 2 people. There could be as many as a dozen or more that have gone back. And these guys are the source of an ongoing investigation by the FBI who are trying to keep tabs and monitor this situation.
How open is the community in talking with you about this phenomenon of going to fight elsewhere?
We have a colleague in the Somali American community there in Minnesota, Abdi, and he was a very good link for me to be able to reach out into that community to find somebody who was willing to talk. I must say, though, there are a lot of people who know maybe 1, maybe 2 people, maybe more that have gone to Iraq and Syria, but because they're also concerned about the legal ramifications or the overall ramifications of this, they're reluctant to speak publicly about what they know.
So the FBI has an idea of who these people are. What happens when they try to come back into the country?
The FBI, when I spoke to them, was not very specific about what the legal ramifications were or what legal action could be taken. It's a case-by-case basis, it seems. I can tell you that from some of these experiences with those that left the Somali American community and went to Somalia and came back, some have been prosecuted for aiding and abetting a terrorist organization. So depending on what occurs when you go overseas, if you can come back and you do come back, there might be a very troublesome and long legal battle you'll have to fight.
All right, and again, thanks to VOA's Kane Faribaugh.
Moving on now to China, the officially atheist country where many say they face religious persecution. That includes Christians who say the government has been cracking down on their churches in recent months. Chinese authorities deny that, saying the buildings have been bulldozed for zoning violations.
Despite these reported attempts to suppress them, the number of Christians in China is growing fast. Experts report at least 30 million Christians in the country already. VOA religion reporter Jerome Sokolovsky visited a Chinese Christian church here in the U.S., and he tells me what he learned. Jerome, let's start with the history of this. What's behind this rise that we're seeing of Christianity in China?
Well, the people I've spoken to, several of them mentioned Tiananmen Square as a historic moment, not just in the democracy movement, but also in people losing faith in Marxist ideology. And many of the intellectuals that were involved in that movement have turned to Christianity, and they almost see that as a kind of democratic movement, having freedom of expression, freedom of religion.
How are Christians being treated right now in China?
Well, it's a complex issue. Most Christians are worshiping according to their faith, but there are some places where the Chinese government, through local authorities, has been cracking down on churches. They've been removing crosses from some churches. They've been outright demolishing other churches.
Videos from Radio Free Asia show a human barrier aimed at preventing the demolition of a church in Wenzhou in April. Chinese authorities say churches have been bulldozed for zoning violations.
But observers say they're testing the waters. They want to see what international reaction is. What is clear here is that the Chinese government is concerned about the rapid growth of Christianity. Some people say that it's growing so fast that in a couple decades, China will be the biggest Christian country in the world with around 250 million Christians.
Now, you had the chance to talk to some Chinese Americans about their feelings about what's going on in China with the crackdown on the churches. What are their thoughts?
Well, there's definitely a lot of concern. People are following the events in China.
In Washington, the former pastor of Harvest Church, Zhang Bo Li, spoke of a systematic crackdown on Christianity in China.
The stronger the persecution, the purer the church will become. The more persecutions, the more lively the church will become.
The interesting thing is that many Christians in China have been Christians less than 10 years. So there's an attempt by Chinese Christians here to reach out to their brethren or co-religionists in China to help them learn about their faith. And they say that's one of the big problems, is that there aren't enough pastors in China to teach what Christianity is. All these people are becoming Christians, but have trouble learning about their own faith.
Right, and is that because it's just you're not able to freely disseminate that information in China?
That is indeed one of the problems. There is internet censorship in China, and there's a shortage of pastors and people with the credentials to be able to teach that. So there are problems with churches inventing their own kind of way forward.
Right. In your story, you mentioned the Pope's recent visit to East Asia, specifically South Korea, as sending a message to China. What was that message?
Well, it's clear that the Pope, in his trip to Korea, was also talking to Christians in China and to Chinese authorities, was trying to send a message, which is that Korea can be a model for Christianity in China. It's a country where Christianity has developed. It has helped the development of democracy there. The Vatican's relations with China have been touchy. It's like a pendulum that swings back and forth. And both the Vatican and many other Christian churches, Protestant Christian churches, are concerned about the Chinese government's crackdowns on their faith there.
And that was VOA religion reporter Jerome Sokolovsky. Thank you so much for that.
All right, for our next story, the internet and information technology are quickly changing how people receive news and how journalists like us deliver it. There are now more ways to tell a story than we ever had before.
And a major university in California is teaching the next generation of journalists in a state-of-the-art newsroom that rivals the big commercial broadcasters. Elizabeth Lee has the story from Los Angeles.
You learn how to tell a story well. Maybe that's your area of expertise.
When Faith Miller wanted to study journalism in college, she never expected this.
We begin with breaking news.
I did not expect that in school I would be reporting on real stories, and I did not know how much work goes into it.
Unlike their counterparts of past generations, students at the University of Southern California Annenberg School of Journalism learn to deliver news across all platforms, including television, radio, and the web. And that's not all, says Willow Bay, director of the School of Journalism.
But today, we expect journalists to be able to use all sorts of technological tools to research stories, to vet that research, to analyze that research. We expect them to be fluid in multimedia storytelling skills. We expect them increasingly to be their own marketing and distribution arms, to get their stories in front of audiences and to spread those stories as far as they can.
They learn all that in this brand new media center, the newsroom of the future, where student journalists who work on TV, radio, and the web sit side by side and collaborate. They also have to be tech savvy, and that means learning basic computer programming languages.
They need to know how the web works and be able to tinker with it.
Digital journalism professor Robert Hernandez demonstrates some of the cutting-edge web tools reporters can use to tell stories in a different way.
You can do 360 panorama through your phone, right? We can talk about what a tornado looks like, how it rips trees out of the ground. Through their phone, there's an app to kind of stitch that together. Take a picture.
Students can also take a class that experiments with Google Glass, a device that connects to the internet and records video and audio. Will Fetterman is a print and digital journalism student.
I think we're entering a market now where if you don't have kind of a wide range of skills and have a little bit of knowledge of everything, you're probably going to have a difficult time finding a job.
But with new technology, future journalists should tread carefully, says the Media Center's executive director, Serena Cha.
In the journalism arena, we've got to consider carefully how do we teach students to use the tools responsibly. So yes, new technology often raises new questions because you're able to manipulate reality even more than before.
Faculty members say at the core of all this technology, students still need to learn traditional journalism, how to write and tell a compelling story in a way that is accurate, fair, and balanced. Elizabeth Lee for VOA News, Los Angeles.
And with that, we hate to say it, but we've come to the end of another assignment on assignment.
We have, but we will be back next week, as always, on our next show when we get the latest on the Ebola epidemic from our correspondent in West Africa.
And we'll bring you a story that doesn't get a lot of attention, the plight of African asylum seekers in Israel.
For all the latest news and to watch any episode of On Assignment, just go to our website, voanews.com, or check us out on Facebook and YouTube.
Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye for now.